Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka Monoglutron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. Now the banlist has been live for about 10 days, so I figure that's long enough to draw some immensely misleading conclusions about it in order to get some of that sweet, sweet ad revenue. So here goes. Kozmo's back, baby! Tier 0! Alright, so if I can just stretch this video out to 10 minutes, I should be able to retire. Let's jump into deck edit and see just how kind the new list has been. So here's the list, and despite just getting one card bumped from 2 to 3, it actually looks quite different than the last time we put this together. As always, I'll give you a little bit of background about the archetype, a little bit of a discussion about what I hope the deck can do, and as always, the card by card. So firstly, for those of you that don't know, Kozmo is an archetype of monsters inspired by both Star Wars and The Wizard of Oz. Man, remember when Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to be fun? Now the meta's just 18 different indecipherable cybernetic dinguses. Anyway, Kozmo was a top-tier deck during the 2016 Nationals format, in which it featured among such all-stars as BA, Monarch, and Pepe, who was still chugging along after its 12th round of nerfs. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, and just as Dorothy dies at the end of Wizard of Oz, so did the deck die as a result of the banlist responsible for Blue Eyes format. At least I think Dorothy died. I haven't watched that movie in a while, until now! After slowly scaling the hits back over the course of 2.5 years, Konami has released Kozmo Dark Destroyer from the ban list entirely, and now we can finally play Kozmo as close to full power as possible. And boy, has time not been kind to this deck. The meta has so far eclipsed, get it, this strategy that even as strong as it is now, it has trouble competing with meta ones. Things just move too fast, plus too hard, and negate too easily that it's hard for a fleet of big dumb ships to take off, so to say. Having said that, I've got an interesting idea that marries the best parts of the Kozmo we know and love with some new tools that might give it enough of a fighting chance to take down the meta. Near the end of Kozmo's period at top tables, deck builders had started innovating. It wasn't fast enough or grindy enough to outpace Burning Abyss, and it couldn't contend with the explosivity of Monarch. To remedy this issue, Kozmo pilots started playing the then-new card of Demise in order to add additional cards to their hand and edge out opponents. By resolving Card of Demise's effect, then resolving the effect of Kozmo Tin Can, they could effectively keep their entire board alongside a newly added ship. This deck aims to continue that innovation, which was so unfairly cut short by the hands of the banlist, by supplementing Kozmo Demise decks with a new and extremely powerful trap lineup. Most notable is Trap Trick, which allows us to find any one of a suite of strong traps designed to hedge against as many strategies as possible. So with that, let's get into the card by card. First, we've got the ships. 3 copies of Dark Destroyer, 1 copy of Forerunner, and 3 Slip Rider. It's not a lot, but the deck's already got too many playables. Next are the pilots. 1 Dark Lady, 1 Farm Girl, 1 Strawman, 1 Sword Trooper, and 3 Tin Can. Finally, we've got 1 Scythe as our Sanctum target. For spells, we've got copies 4 and 5 of Tin Can, E-Telly, and 1-for-1, followed by 3 Desires and 3 Kozmo Town. The traps are where the magic is happening, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, 3 Trap Trick, and a package of 2 Sanctum, 2 Heavy Storm Duster, 2 Back to the Front, 2 Cosmojo, before ending with 3 Solemn Strike. In the extra, we've got Barboroid, Thunder Charger, both halves of CDI, Sarayama, and Volcasaurus, followed by Lynx, which I'd be surprised if we ever made one of, Trisbania, Nightmare's Unicorn, Phoenix, and Cerberus, Genius, Hippo Shinnigan, Wee-Witch, Underclock Taker, and Link Haribo. So with that, let's jump into the games. Our first match is up against Raid Raptors, a deck made newly relevant by the advent of a new Link monster, which our opponent is playing some interesting enablers for. They're going first, which is bad news for us. They're going to activate this Dark World Dealings, find a second copy of Fuzzy, we'll discard our Dark Destroyer, they'll trigger Fuzzy, then normal summon a Vanishing Lanius, special summon a couple of Fuzzies from hand, and go into Wise. Wise will trigger, getting a copy of Mimicry from deck. Afterwards they're going to Xyz summon a Force Strix, to add a copy of Singing to hand. Wise Strix will set a Rum, then Mimicry Lanius will add a Raid Raptor Nest to hand, Raid Raptor Nest will add a Pain, they'll special the Singing, they'll special the Pain, and surprise, surprise, here's a second copy of Force Strix. They're going to activate that as well before activating this copy of Rum to go into an air raid and passing it back to us. Our turn is decidedly more simple. We're going to set a Kozmo Town and 4 traps, fire off a card of Demise, and, well, I guess discard a couple copies of Infip. In our opponent's draw phase, we're going to activate Artifact Sanctum and Heavy Dust Storms, scouting for Solemns. We're then going to special summon a copy of Scythe and trigger its effect. Afterwards, we'll activate Trap Trick, getting ourselves a BTTF, and then we'll immediately activate it to get this Dark Destroyer from our graveyard so this Force Strix doesn't pose a threat to us. Our opponent's going to start by normal summoning a Sharp Lanius. They will use its effect to attack attack over our copy of Scythe before special summoning a copy of Fuzzy Lanius from Graveyard and using Rum to get back this Force Strix. We should be able to chew through this board with just a Dark Destroyer because we are Kozmo after all, and we have a Kozmojo set. We'll attack then activate Kozmojo, banishing this troublesome Xyz monster before going into Farm Girl, critical to almost every OTK. We'll use Farm Girl's effect to get a copy of Dark Lady. We'll then special this Dark Lady and attack over one of the very few remaining monsters. We're going to add Dark Destroyer at end step. That's going to give us both a monster pop and a monster negate. Our opponent's going to Dark World Dealings. They don't find anything and pass back to us, and this should be all she wrote. We're going to activate Kozmo Town to get this copy of Farm Girl back into our hand. Then we'll go to the battle phase. We will tag out this Dark Lady after attacking to destroy their last remaining monster. Get in for 3,000, get in for 1,500, trigger the effect of Farm Girl to find ourselves a Forerunner of all things, and get in for lethal. Our second match is up against Nekroz Zephyra. We are going first, which is excellent, but what's less excellent are the contents of our opener. We have a Tin Can, a Solemn Strike, and a whole lot of nothing. We're going to start by normal summoning this copy of Tin Can, setting to, I guess, hoping our opponent blind MSTs, and then passing. At end phase, we'll activate the effect of Tin Can and get a copy of Slip Rider into our hand. Our opponent's going to start by normal summoning a copy of Manju the 10,000 Hands, adding a Brionac, then they'll set rotation, setting a copy of Oracle, which they will immediately flip for a Zephyrath. They'll activate Brio to get a copy of Unicorn, then they'll get it out with Kaleidoscope using Herald's effect for a Decisive Armor, set Zephyrath, at which point we will tag out for a copy of Slip Rider, destroying it, and then set a card and pass it back to us. We should be able to beat this opener. We're going to start by normal summoning a copy of Strawman. We'll use its effect, which baits out the Divine Strike from our opponent. That's great news. Now we can go to combat after activating 1-for-1 to get a Tin Can to our side of the field. Attack into this Unicorn. They will activate Decisive Armor. We will banish this copy of Slip Rider for a Farm Girl, which conveniently has 100 more attack than Manju. We'll use its effect to get a Dark Destroyer. We will tag out for said Dark Destroyer, and our opponent will concede. Alright, so it's time for game 3, and you know what that means, a best of 3 versus meta. Our opponent's on Thunder Dragon, and our hand is abysmal. Thankfully, despite containing 4 monsters, it contains the only trap we need, Trap Trick. We're going to start by normal summoning a copy of Kozmo Tin Can, setting a copy of Trap Trick, and going to end step. What do we find but a copy of Kozmo Town? I got a little greedy here. Our opponent's going to start by drawing a copy of Battery Man Solar. We will respond with a Trap Trick and an Artifact Sanctum for an Artifact Scythe, and we should be good until next turn. Unfortunately, our opponent is playing a copy of Eon Thunder Dragon, so they can special summon that after activating a couple of Thunder Dragon effects, and then attack into our Tin Can, forcing us to tag out for a Dark Destroyer. Thank goodness I had it. They'll set a card and pass it back to us, and from this position we should be able to win. We draw another Slip Rider. We'll activate Kozmo Town, putting this Tin Can back in our hand before shuffling 2 away, one of which is Farm Girl of all things. We'll attack with the Scythe, attack directly with Dark Destroyer, attack with Tin Can before tagging out for Farm Girl, getting in for 1,500, triggering her effect for a Kozmojo in case things get crusty, tagging out for a Dark Destroyer. We will use Dark Destroyer to destroy the other Dark Destroyer, getting a copy of Slip Rider to destroy our copy of Kozmo Town to get a second copy of Kozmojo, once again in case crustiness occurs, before getting in directly for 23 and lethal. So it's time for game 2, and despite our opponent going first, this is one of the tamer hands Thunder Dragon can open. Our opponent's going to start by activating this copy of Instant Fusion for a Katamari attack from their extra deck. Afterwards, they're going to go into a Thunder Dragon Lord, trigger the effect of Bolt Thunder Dragon for a bird, set a copy of Impermanence, and pass it back to us. We're going to start by activating Kozmo Town, shuffling 3 cards back into our deck, normal summoning a copy of Tin Can, trying to activate its effect. They'll transient, so we'll Tin Can in response, then add it back with Kozmo Town for fodder for 1-for-1, how heads up, and then at end step get ourselves a copy of Slip Rider to hand. Our opponent's going to draw, and what do they find but a Desires? They're going to start by activating Thunder Dragon. To interrupt it, we'll activate the effect of Kozmo Tin Can for a Slip Rider. They will add a Thunder Dragon to hand and try to do it again. We'll interrupt it with a copy of Kozmojo. They will chain Yakashi Warashi, and we will Solemn Strike it. This is pretty good news for us, except for the fact that they still have extenders in their hand. We're going to use Slip Rider to get a copy of Tin Can. They'll use the bird to get back Bolt and go into Super Bolt. Bolt is going to add a copy of Fusion. They will then use Fusion for a Thunder Dragon Lord, then trigger Thunder Dragon Lord finally off of this final copy of Thunder Dragon. They'll then use Pot of Desires to draw 2 cards, one of which is an Eon Thunder Dragon, and I'll concede. Alright, time for that all-important Game 3, and our opponent has elected to allow us to go first. Okay, this is a rare opportunity. We can't mess this up. We're going to start by activating Kozmo Town and shuffle 3 cards back in, and no! A trap and 2 Kozmo Town! What are the chances? We're going to use Trap Tricks for Sanctum and Sanctum for Scythe, and pray that we find a Tin Can or something. Our opponent's going to activate Bolt Thunder and Avian to set 2 cards on their side of the field before passing back to us. We find a Kozmo, but it's basically the worst one. We'll attack into the Bolt and negate its effect. That's something at the very least, but it's not going to be able to stand up to any of the fusions. Our opponent's going to draw for turn, and what do they find but an Infip? They're going to flip up this copy of Origin Thunder Dragon to go into Linkaribo, trigger the effect of Origin. We have to negate it with Dark Lady. Of course, afterwards they can activate Bolt Thunder Dragon, activate Fusion, and go into Thunder Dragon Lord. This is likely the end of the game. They're going to get over us for 1,000 and directly for 300. Before passing it back, we draw into a Dark Destroyer. We'll shuffle it with Kozmo Town, and what do we find but a Kozmojo? So we'll show our hand and concede. So we're back with the deck. Extremely painful set there, but really exemplifies a lot of the problems with this strategy. First, the pros. 1. Dark Destroyer is a hell of a card. It interrupts, it pushes for lethal, it extends plays, it is simply amazing, and I didn't think getting one more copy would change anything, but the ability to ensure it's always in your hand is actually immense. 2. The targeting prevention is extremely relevant in a format full of Striker, and the lack of targeting on Kozmo is similarly powerful. And 3. Boy oh boy is Trap Trick right at home in this strategy. Scythe is exactly the tool the deck needed to compete, and as one of the few decks that can still OTK, it feels amazing to do so. Where this strategy really shines, though, is in the sideboard, where varied trap silver bullets like Apocrypha flourish. And the cons. First, it still bricks. You can draw a hand of all monsters like it's 2016, but unlike 2016, you're not gonna win with it. 2. Demise means that outside of impermanence, your hand trap options are extremely limited, which can spell certain demise in certain matchups. And 3, for a deck well known for its grind game, it actually doesn't grind that well. The weaknesses identified during PK Fire format are still present and much more visible now that the speed of the game is so much higher. All in all, it's a shockingly playable strategy. Is it tier 0? No, not even close. But can it steal games off of meta? Definitely. So that's that. It feels good to be playing Demise again, but it feels much better to be playing 3 copies of Dark Destroyer. If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/monobluetron every Monday night from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time, and if you have an idea for a deck or archetype you want me to take a look at on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comments section and I'll do my best. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.